The life cycle of your candidate industry is important to understand as well. And when we look at life cycle, we're going to look at it in the context of industry status and its impact on your success as an entrepreneur. When we explore the industry, we've talked about industry conditions and specifically the knowledge and demand factors. Now we're going to transition into industry status and think about the influence of life cycle and structure. This gives us some insights into the rules of that industry, as well as some of the hurdles that we may face. And within the opportunity analysis canvas, this will introduce our discussion of the fifth element of industry status. So, life cycle. It's similar to what you would expect. It's the stage of development of an industry. And the life cycle is going to influence your success because it impacts how existing and new competitors are going to behave and react to your entry. It comes in several categories. In this example, it starts with research and development. You may have a limited monopoly if you're an early entrant. The second phase is growth. You begin to launch your product in the market, and other competitors enter the market as well. The third stage is maturity. You have essentially reached a peak of competition, and you yourself may face somewhat lower production and somewhat lower revenues than you may have when you were in that growth phase. And then lastly is decline, whereas there are simply too many options for the market. There are too many competitors for all to survive, and you see some winding down of that opportunity. Now, other elements, when you look at life cycle, may break them into young, middle-aged, and old as well. The curve is very similar. And we want to, as startups, recognize there's tremendous value to being towards the front of that curve. It's not to say that if you're not the first entrant that there's no opportunity, but I would argue if there are 10 or 20 or 30 other companies already in the space that may be trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, and particularly if they're trying to achieve it the same way, that might not be the product opportunity that I would at least pursue. Is that the life cycle influences the cost of entry and the rules of competition within an industry. And depending on the maturity, if you're early, it can be very affordable. It can be relatively easy from a financial standpoint, and much more cost-effective for entrepreneurs to enter and compete successfully if they are early entrants into an industry. Inversely, if it's a middle or late-stage industry, they may already be dominated by large and established competitors. They may have economies of scale already established. They may have a brand and partnerships and distribution already built. And it can be very expensive, very complicated, and potentially not very profitable to be a startup in that environment. So we want to favor being an early entrant and participating in the benefits of being at the front of that life cycle. What that means in context, when you look at a few of the metrics for Nollywood, is the estimated annual revenues of the Nigerian film industry is $590 million. There are further investment mechanisms and loan mechanisms funded by the government to try and increase and grow that. We see that there are 50 films produced in Nigeria weekly. And the average cost of them are somewhere between $25,000 and $70,000. In contrast, a top Hollywood film, $250 million. An average Hollywood film, maybe something in the order of $50 million. So you're still comparing thousands to millions when you are looking at the relative cost of entry and operation within these different areas. And the opportunity to distribute online may bring a very attractive audience as well. So the production in a country by no means limits its market and the customer base to that country. I want to take a different look at another firm that I'm very familiar with. a company called Fiscal Note. So Fiscal Note is using a proprietary database that they've developed of legislation and advanced predictive analytics to sell to companies and organizations to search, discover, and forecast state and federal legislation. This lets them monitor trends in different industries or states that those companies or organizations are interested in. And it leverages machine learning algorithms that Fiscal Note has developed to discover new developments relevant to your company or organization, as well as to anticipate what may come and what it means to you. So when you think about the life cycle, one way to consider it is how many companies are out there doing the same thing. How many companies are out there that are using some measure of big data and machine learning and analytics to examine state and federal legislation? For me, the answer was not many, arguably none, the way that they're doing it. So they're very much on the front end of this market. What that lets them do, being on the very front, is to build a strong team. So beyond the three co-founders, including Jonathan Chin, the CTO, that I work most closely here as a student at the University of Maryland, they were able to build a very strong advisory team. An advisory team from some companies that you may know, like Elsevier and LegalZoom. An advisory team of federal expertise, people that had worked in the White House, people that had worked at the State Department, people that understood the market that they were pursuing and had the relationships to help facilitate that. They also were able to secure some notable investors. Mark Cuban, Jerry Yang, one of the co-founders of Yahoo, as well as venture capital. So as students, as full-time students in the fall of their senior year, they were able to raise $1.2 million in venture funding from NEA and first-round capital. So in that way, by being new, by being at the very front of that industry life cycle, they were able to attract and bring in talent and funding that had they been the 10th company or the 20th company to do it 2 or 3 years from now, they probably would not have been able to get the advisors nor get the funding that they've been able to access as an early entrant. So what we see there is that new ventures perform best in young industries. There's substantially less competition by definition. And the competition is often small, thereby giving a more level playing field to new entrants. It also gives you somewhat of a common learning curve. When everyone is new, there are no old competitors. There are no established leaders. There aren't decades of experience. There isn't partnerships and exclusivity agreements that are already in play. There aren't distribution channels that are already locked up. It's somewhat of an open playing field that you can compete with and compete on somewhat equal footing. So in summary, when we think about life cycle, it influences the competitive environment of the venture and your overall success substantially. Young industries present multiple advantages for new entrants. And while it's not known, while you do have to give significant consideration to what may happen, how to establish, there's not a lot of precedent for what will work. I would argue that while that is a challenge, there's still more ultimate upside to enter and participate in the young industry and in industries that are very early in those life cycles.